Okay, so good evening, everyone. We've got a very nice and intimate group this evening so far. It is possible that others may trickle in during the course of the evening. So thank you very much for joining us. Actually, there are so few of us that I can call everyone by name. So welcome Munya, welcome Sia, welcome Simpiwe, Jade, I see you, Lindiwe, Onezwa, Sarah, and Katie. So you guys are the chosen few who joined early and got to have your names specially mentioned. So thank you very much for being the early birds. So yeah, this is so welcome to this 4IR Director webinar which we're having tonight. So my name is Sbu Msimango, and I'm privileged and honored on behalf of the Directors Association and the Association for the Advancement of Black Accountants in Southern Africa, ABASA, to host and moderate this evening's conversation around the 4IR Director. So before we get into the business of the day, I'll just like for two representatives, one from each of the collaborating organizations this evening, to just introduce themselves and introduce the organizations and perhaps the concept and the reason for us having such a gathering this evening. So Munya, I'll ask you to go first on behalf of the Directors Association.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sbu, and thank you to everyone that has joined in. I'm really privileged and excited at everyone that has come on board for such an exciting topic, right? It's something that we all wonder what this 4IR about and how does it fit in our leadership prospects on the board as entrepreneurs, professionals, etc. So from a Directors Association perspective, we operate in the board market, in the director market. We provide training, we provide governance, advisory, consulting, etc. But what is core to what we're doing here tonight is the education of directors. Core to our business is training and placing, at the end of the day, directors on different boards. And ethos of ours is directors to be experts and knowledgeable in all areas of the boardroom. And one of those key areas that's starting to make a lot of noise in the market is 4IR. So it made a lot of sense for us to start, entering into this market and finding out what really is it about, for two things. Number one, so that, we understand it generally, so that we can be competent as directors ourselves. And number two, for our members, which is key for us, that our members understand what 4IR is, what role it plays in their businesses, how they can make decisions around 4IR, and the impact of 4IR in organizations, etc. So I'm really excited about what's going to happen today. Our key speakers, two speakers, fantastic. And I really hope that we just enjoy the sessions and learn a lot from these two speakers. Thank you so much, Luke.
Thank you very much, Munya. So Sia is on the call. Sia, I'm not sure if Puti is with us. So if I don't see a Puti on the line, unless she's using a different name, Puti, are you in the call?
No, Sbu, she's not. She's just running a bit late. But I'll just basically, she's asked me just to quickly just take over from her. So okay. My name is Sia, like Sbu has introduced me. So I'm actually a deputy chairperson of ABASA. ABASA, the subcommittee of the Joburg, the Johannesburg branch. So basically what ABASA looks after, or the subcommittee that I'm part of looks after, is we basically try to help in terms of increasing the number of Black accountants, and in particular Black chartered accountants. We provide mentorship sessions, and then we also just arrange dialogues like these ones, where we're basically just trying to help each other as young Black professionals in terms of like leadership skills and uplifting each other. And then there are other in-house sessions that we also hold with the mentees, where it's intimate sessions like these ones, where we invite executives from different organizations to basically come and speak on different topics. So I think we saw it fit that instead of us pulling in one direction and organizing our own events and session and whatnot, I think it's sometimes better to collaborate with other organizations which are basically doing the same thing, to just basically try and make sure that we empower ourselves. So I also work with Umunya on the Directors Association as well. Thanks, Sbu.
Thank you very much, Sia. Thank you very much. Before we get into the business of the day, so everyone on the call, I think just in terms of housekeeping, we are going to have I'm going to introduce our guests shortly, our two panelists for today. And then after that, we will engage in a dialogue. And I think the small number that we have on the call really will allow us to get the most out of these speakers, because they are, as you hear in the introductions, they are, extremely accomplished individuals who have a wealth of experience and knowledge to share with us this evening. So just to introduce, I think the subject for today, the concept of the fourth industrial revolution itself was first popularized around 2013, 2014, thereabout, by a gentleman named Klaus Schwab, who is the chairman and the convener of the World Economic Forum. So in recent years, as you might know, we've in South Africa specifically, we've had conference after summit, after indaba, after dialogue on the subject of 4IR, and of course with varying levels of relevance and impact around this topic. So what is different about today's 4IR conversation is that we're having it at a time of reckoning with a reality that is completely unprecedented. And that is, of course, the global pandemic, which, to quote Arundhati Roy in a recent Financial Times op-ed, has made the mighty kneel and brought the world to a halt like nothing else could. So for today's discussion, it goes without saying that there's a heightened urgency for leadership that understands and is indeed equipped to harness the technologies and the thinking of the fourth industrial revolution. And with that said, as I said, we're joined by two very distinguished panelists today who will share their thoughts. Can I ask that everyone on the call please mute your microphones? Yes, so if you're on the call, please mute your microphone, or I will have to ask you to do it I have to ask you by name, which I really don't want to do. Yes, I'm introducing our guest speakers. First, our very first speaker, which I'm introducing, is Sandiso Sbisi. Thank you very much, Sandiso, for joining us. Sandiso is the founder of COOI Studios. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to read that as an acronym, but COOI, that's correct? Kui, oh, my bad. So Sandiso is the founder of Kui Studios, and it is an open innovation advisory and lab for corporates. It bridges the gap between innovative products developed by startups and corporations. It bridges the gap developed by startups and corporations, basically wanting to solve tough problems using design thinking. Prior to Kui Studios, Sandiso served as the head of open innovation for the Africa region at Accenture, a well-known global technology and consulting company. And we are also joined by Thabo Molefe. And perhaps we should begin by extending our apologies to Thabo, as he was incorrectly referred to on our promotional material as an IT executive director. Thabo is in fact a commercial executive director and an entrepreneur. He just happens to have a wealth of experience in the technology industry. So I guess that's where the confusion of the misnomer came from. So Thabo has extensive board level experience as well as expertise in driving revenue growth, managing multidisciplinary teams to develop and commercialize new products and solutions, penetrating new markets in South Africa and the rest of Africa, and implementing effective sales and marketing strategies to significantly increase market share and revenue growth. So with that introduction, Thabo, since I've just introduced you, maybe let's start with you. Talk us through what is this mythical 4IR, fourth industrial revolution idea that everybody is talking about.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sbu, for that. And I got a little bit scared when I was referred to as IT director. I thought, well, I'm not. People would expect me to speak as a as an IT expert. But look, the fourth industrial revolution, you're right. Klaus Schwab is the man who was responsible for coining it, the fourth industrial revolution. And in essence, in simplicity, what it is, it's basically the blurring, when you come to the blurring of boundaries between what I would call the physical, the digital, and the biological worlds. When those three aspects of our lives come together. And that's what characterizes the fourth industrial revolution. And coupled with that is the utilization or the ability to utilize new technology to actually further those aspects of life. And by those new technologies, we're talking about artificial intelligence, cloud computing, robotics, 3D printing, the Internet of Things, and maybe also things like wireless technologies, some of these wireless technologies that are there. So, and what it really is about and what it has led to is it has actually impacted how we work and how we live. Okay, it has impacted life and work, but it has also impacted how businesses actually are supposed to be viewing customers, providing services, and how customers expect to be serviced as well. That's what it's about. But at the forefront of this is technology. And I think what makes it difficult for people to understand it or to latch onto it is the fact that there's this big thing about technology and it scares people off. But it's really about different type of decisions that people make there. And the one thing that we should be careful of as well is also to realize that it's not a concept or something that came up on its own. I mean, it takes over from the other industrial revolutions that existed before, right? There was the first, the second, and the third. And we remember that the first industrial revolution was in the 18th century. That's where it comes from, and it's like a relay. So each one is taken from the prior one or the previous one, and this is how we've carried on in life. And I guess that's how life is. So quite briefly and quickly, I mean, what are these things? I mean, there was a bit of an embarrassment at some point in Parliament when somebody said, "Don't talk to us about the fourth. Do you understand what the first, the second, and the third are?" And it's a very simple thing. They're not difficult concepts. I mean, the first is really the introduction of the steam engine. Okay, the steam engine at the time, and then this led to mechanization of production, and there was a lot of social change, mass social change. There was urbanization, and then you get the second industrial revolution, which happened in the 19th century. What it introduced at the time, the key features of it was the introduction of electricity, and we had other scientific advances that led to mass production. Okay, for the first time there was mass production because there was electrification. And then come to the third industrial revolution. That was in the 20th century, and that's the century that I think the bulk of us who are talking on this call were born, and that we largely grew up. And the main features of the third industrial revolution was computing and the digital technology. There was introduction of that. And this then led to an increase in automation, right? Automation of manufacturing, and there was a major disruption of industries. For instance, banking, the financial services industry particularly was highly impacted by the third industrial revolution. And there was a lot of displacement of skills and a lot of things changed. There are simple things that happened in the 20th century with the third industrial revolution. For instance, we suddenly had ATMs being introduced. We had the internet coming in, and with the internet, we had the concept of, there was telephonic banking, there was internet banking. That's how those impacts actually came into banks having to change how they think and how they view this. And I just to quote what Klaus Schwab said, he said that it has the potential, fourth industrial revolution has the potential to raise global income levels, to improve the quality of life for populations around the world. But at the same time, this technological innovation will lead to, he views it as something that's going to lead to some amazing miracles on the supply side of industry, and it leads to long-term gains in efficiency and productivity. And we're starting to see some of those things, right? But the issue here is that he sees it as something that's going to start driving down transportation costs, and it'll change legislation around the world, how people view it. And global supply chains are going to have to be readjusted because of the fourth industrial revolution. But one of the major difficulties that we're seeing is that it's also bringing a lot of disruption to business, okay? Business disruption is happening. Business have to think about their business models. But one of the major things I think for a developing economy like ours is the threat of displacement of skills. What you start to see when you get into the fourth industrial revolution and where it's going, and I'm going to stop here and then let somebody else carry on, is that you'll start to see where there's a divergence that's happening, where you'll see low skills that are lowly paid and very high skills that are highly paid. And usually the skills that are in between, in the middle, the mid-tier of skills, where there's a lot of process orientation, those skills tend to be displaced. Now, that's where there's displacement of skills. That's where there's disruption of labor and labor patterns. And it's a major HR issue and headache for HR executives or HR managers to think about how they repurpose the skills already have, because you have them. And once you've automated stuff, you either retrench people. In a developing economy, it's not the best thing to do. So the challenge is for those HR people, but it's also the challenge is also for universities, how they prepare people, the academic world, how people are prepared to enter this kind of economy. Now remember, a lot of textbooks that people are reading and writing and things they're using were written and developed in the 20th century, during the third industrial revolution, and we've now entered the fourth industrial revolution. And mind you, a lot of it is already on the go. You're already using it. So it's not a concept that is out there. And the one thing I want to show people is, for instance, I run and I cycle, and I'm wearing a Garmin watch. This watch is linked to satellites and all sorts of things. I am already in the fourth industrial revolution by virtue of that. There's a lot of AI here. There's a lot of tracking of what I do, my heartbeat, my heart rate, where I am by satellite. If you've got a car or a phone that's got GPS on it, you are already. That's part of the fourth industrial revolution. Let me stop there and then we can start talking about other things.
Thank you very much, Thabo. Sandy, so I've already introduced you, so I will hand over to you to share your opening thoughts with us, please.
Okay, so firstly, thank you for having me. I guess I'll just start maybe from the work that I do, which will probably explain my position in the fourth industrial revolution, and maybe I'll call it 4IR just to be for easier speech for me. So the work that I do is around helping large enterprises solve business problems. And I know that everyone does that in consulting, but what we do differently is that we only work on solutions that are emerging technologies. So it would be Internet of Things, it would be artificial intelligence, it would be virtual reality, augmented reality, a whole array of things, 3D printing. And we use this by firstly going through a design thinking approach, whereby we really help the clients understand what their problem is, what they're trying to solve for, and how they're going to solve it. And then we'd find a relevant emerging technology for that. So I think we specifically looking for people that are looking to exponentially grow or exponentially cut costs by using emerging technologies. And so I won't necessarily go through the description of what 4IR does. I think Molefe has done a good job of that before me. I just think I probably want to just speak about, like, you know, how it's taking shape in a developing country. So there was a bit of a brief around skills that are currently being displaced. As much as that's a challenge that we have in this country, I think there's an opportunity for us to find or grow new skills. All of these technologies are built by people effectively. And there's a big gap in terms of just people that can actually build these technologies. So, and I'll compare this to like other developed countries. So, you know, like the South Koreas, the Japans, the US, and I have to mention the Asian countries because they were once actually developing countries, but now they're actually developed countries. So it is possible to get there. It's just about the government being, you know, having a strong head about it and doing the right things. But that's another topic for another day. But I'd say that it definitely is possible. And so what's common with those sorts of nations is just they focus around education in the skills. So I mean, Japan at some points they were sending all their kids to the US to learn how to code. They don't do that as much anymore. People are learning to code in Japan. The same, India is trying to do that by really building a big, you know, coding workforce. You've seen all of the firms, Deloitte, Accenture, PwC, they all have these big coding factories, I'd say, in India and all parts of India. So I think that's definitely an opportunity for us as South Africa to actually look to actually growing our current skills base. and around building these technologies, because we really have a deficit. I mean, if I were to share with you just some shocking statistics, is that like we probably only have about I'd say 3 or 4 AI focused startups. And the sad thing is, of those, only 2 are actually Black owned. That just shows you just how much of a skills gap we actually have in the country amongst us as Black people. VR is even worse. I mean, there's probably like 1 VR Black startup that probably is worth mentioning. We just have a big skills deficit. That's the point I'm trying to drive home. So I really see it as an opportunity. I just also think that the South Africa's got a couple of problems that we're facing in society. One of them that I would just zone in on is maybe around agriculture. So South Africa has, compared to Amsterdam is a smaller country than South Africa. I hope it's the country that I'm talking about.
The Netherlands. Yeah.
Netherlands, yes. I thought I was getting it wrong. Netherlands. So the Netherlands is a smaller country than South Africa, but they produce like I think like 5 times more products than we do. And that's just based on how efficiently they actually use the space that they have. But their agriculture is primarily driven by just high tech, and we don't have that in South Africa. We have so much land, but yet we're not even able to meet that kind of yield. So it's really an opportunity for us to start using technology to try and help us increase our yield as a country, and therefore we can be able to actually export more goods. So there's really an opportunity for us to look at, and that's just one problem that we have as a developing country. There's so many others. We've got an issue of crime in the country. We've got an issue of unemployment. There's so many ways that we can be actually using technology to solve it. So I guess what I'm just trying to say is that there's really a big opportunity if we actually grab this opportunity. I think there's lots that we can do, and I think we've done it in the past. And I'll take you back to the whole telephone versus mobile phone conundrum. So we know about how there was 30, 40 years back, only a few households had a telephone, and now today, like every household has got minimum like two phones, so that just speaks to just how we can actually leapfrog. And I think this era has afforded us an opportunity to leapfrog, but only the countries that actually really are strategic about it will be successful. We as South Africa, my biggest fear that we actually run the risk of missing this boat, and other countries like Rwanda, Kenya may actually fast track and beat us in this race if we don't get the fundamentals right. So I just think that there's a big opportunity, but there's just some big issues that we as a country need to meet about and really solve if we want to actually leapfrog into this era. So I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Sandy. So a great contribution, and I think I want to engage you a bit there, especially on the ideas around government, and government may be a bit out of reach for those of us who are on this call, but most of us who are on this call are senior managers, directors, or aspiring leaders in the business environment. So I imagine there's a role for the audience on this call as well to play. They may have very limited control in terms of influencing legislation and releasing funding for the right sort of programs, but I'm sure there are certain ways in which they can get involved, whether they run their own businesses or they're working in larger, more established organizations. So while you think on that, I just want to our audience, as you can see, we're a very small and intimate group this evening. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chats. If you agree with anything that one of the speakers is saying or you relate, feel free to type whatever it is in the chats. If you want to speak on the microphone, you can also indicate that to the Directors Association account, and we'll recognize you and allow you to engage in the dialogue, because we want, at the end of this conversation, to have really gained as much as possible from Thabo and Sandy. So, and anyone else as well, I think, on the call who's ready to engage with us on this subject. So yes, please feel free to drop your questions in the chats. Yes, Andy. So back to you. On that topic of how do we as I mean business managers, leaders in private, public sector perhaps as well. How do we, what role can we play?
So I think the biggest challenge is, I think the private sector in this country is very, very old. Looking at the leadership, it's a very old demographic. It's the ages between 50, 60. You know, just whenever I interact with this age group, just simple things like putting on a VR headset is like a challenge. And so that's just the first part of it. So it's just getting them to understand, you know, how this thing should work. I think the biggest challenge you probably have is that I don't think we, and I'm guilty of this as well, I don't think we've done a good job in explaining the value of emerging technologies. So if you're speaking to an executive, how will an AI solution help them save costs, or increase revenue or find new markets? I don't think that's been happening. But I do see there's a bigger uptake of that right now. I mean, right now we're doing something for a government agency around, they want to build a cloud platform for different stakeholders to participate in. And they're looking to us to give them the answers for that, which I think is very new and very fresh. And it's surprisingly, it's a government agency, so it's all good, you know. So I think there is definitely some sort of traction towards that. But I think for the longest time, I think we've just been talking about these technologies, but not really articulating the value. So I think for us as senior managers, what we should be doing is actually calculating, crunching the numbers to actually demonstrate what value this opportunity or the solution can actually unlock. I think there's also just I'd like to challenge us in how we go about solving problems. I think there's to date there's been a very much a closed approach. So when you have a solution, you get people around the room that are in your company, or people that look like you, or people, but I think there's a challenge for us to involve our suppliers, to involve startups, to involve civil society when solving problems. And I think by that we actually address a multitude of issues at the same time whilst also making money. So that's what I think we should be doing as senior managers. And yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I think that'll be a nice segue back to you, Thabo. I think, Thabo, you have obviously extensive experience in implementing all sorts of technologies to solve problems for different types of industries. So yeah, I just want you to talk to us a bit about your thoughts on, I mean, how leaders, directors, senior managers, how do we get involved in this process, in participating actively in this 4IR?
Look, I think the first thing is to just to keep an open mind. You know, there needs to be a lot of open-mindedness about it, because, as I said, it's not as daunting as people believe it is, right? I think Sadiso is right when she says that you need to involve all stakeholders. So the first thing I think that executive teams tend to, the first mistake executive teams tend to make is to think that this sort of thing, when a new technology comes in, the strategy around it is the preserve of the executives. And that's where the problem starts, right? It's not the preserve of the executives. So it depends also on your school of thought in terms of developing strategy, but I'm a firm believer in strategy being developed from the bottom up instead of top down. And if you do it from the bottom up instead of top down, what it does is it tends to open you up to all sorts of possibilities and ideas that are out there. That's the first thing. So open-mindedness. And I think what then happens is that it has to be, as I said, it has to be at the executive table. There has to be a strategic discussion at all times. But whenever you talk about a concept like the fourth industrial revolution or technology, it seems to be something that is for the CTO or the CIO, all right? Then it's left with the IT guys to try and figure it out. The problem with it is that, as I've said, it brings a convergence of disciplines. It's a multidisciplinary thing. And because it's multidisciplinary, it lends itself to an area that requires everybody's involvement. So from HR to marketing to sales to product development to even the guy who runs security or even the guy who manages facilities, that's where you've got to have this discussion. It's got to be broad-based like that, but it's got to be from the bottom up. That's the first. The second thing. The third thing is to also look around within our country. So scientists is talking about the opportunities presented by skills, the opportunities for skills that this thing is presenting. So where does that come from? It comes from the fact that there's a disruption, right? And the disruption starts first of all at a commercial level. So if you're a bank, you had branches, you're a bank manager with people who walk in and they sit at tills or as tellers, and they receive these people coming in. Now, the same bank is the same bank that actually introduced ATMs, and other technologies actually start coming in. As they come on board, what tends to happen with a lot of companies, they don't think about strategically where they would like to be, okay, from a technology perspective and what that means for the overall offering. So they seem to be catching this by the tail. So what happens is that, oops, the internet is here. There's this thing called internet banking. Let's introduce it. But you realize that once they've done that, the backend systems that are supposed to support it are not adequate to support the flood of customers that are coming in. That's the first thing that I saw, at least in the 20th century when internet banking was, a lot of banks would not support that. So you cannot afford to have that during this 4IR. And the reason for that being that the rate of change and the speed at which customers expect it is much quicker and much faster. And this is influenced by the fact that you're not dealing with people that are quite exposed. Okay, your customer base, your clientele is exposed to a lot of other experiences. They already are very active on Google. They're very active, some of them in social media. And what happens is that they have an expectation that if they have a question today, it will be answered today. And if they have a question now, it must be answered instantaneously. Now, there are other experiences that have come in. There are other things we can talk about some of these streaming services like your Netflixes and stuff like that. People have been allowed through technology now and through this bandwidth that we have and broadband that we have now, is that they've been able to now even customize the services that they're getting from these services that they subscribe to. Now, the problem that we face there is that people tend to take that experience. And I spoke about how it's a convergence of your biological, your physical, it's basically your physical world, your technological world, and all other aspects. So people tend to take those experiences into the commercial space. What it means for managers is that you also have to be on top of what the requirements are that your market that you're servicing has. Right? That's the fourth thing that you've got to have. Now, how do you do that? And how is that driven? It's driven by data. Okay, we spoke about the Internet of Things, and we'll get into that later. But if you think about the 4IR and all the technologies that actually drive it, I think one of the big machines behind, one of the big technologies in 4IR is the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. Those two are probably the ones that are speeding everything along. Now, what happens is today people expect that when they call and they want an answer, actually people don't even like to call the call centers anymore. They're doing online shopping. As they're doing online shopping, they want to see a bot that's going to be actually looking at what they do and trying to predict what it is they're looking for and actually trying to assist them. The problem is that when you go into a bank, you almost expect that sort of experience to come from a bank. So my view is that bottom-up approach, be open-minded, and I think executive teams have to make sure that it becomes part of the strategic discussion at every session and meeting that they get into. And the other thing that it does is that you need to also create an innovation culture within organizations, because that's where the ability. So when in my previous role, when we were implementing new technologies, how that came about was to harness the innovation culture that was within our business, as well as that sits within the customer base that we're servicing. So I'll give you a typical example. For instance, we were doing some work with the legal fraternity, and they were known for a long time as the ones that were the slowest to actually transform and adopt technology. But once we started to show them the efficiencies that came with using technology, and the fact that because they're under budget pressure and they wanted to, for instance, the billable hour is everything to a lawyer. And nobody would refuse to accept that if they realize how it makes them efficient, how it makes them actually more profitable, because that's what makes the wheels turn. That's what drives advancement. But the secret was that some of the innovations that we came up with were actually innovations that came from within the customer itself. Okay, so the other thing that I think is critical is that for executives that are sitting within a business, all of them have to have a very clear and pure understanding of the markets that they service, what those markets are looking for, and the pressures that their markets are feeling. And the only way you can do that is to be very intimate with your customers. So gone are the days of being product-centric and being product excellent. You need to have customer intimacy as well. And customer intimacy is what's going to help you to get into being able to see some of these things come through and how you can implement it, because you can't implement a solution that people are not looking for. So one of the biggest problems that you see is, to name an example of for instance, the situation of the scooter ambulances in the Eastern Cape. That is a clear case in point of a solution that's created for a problem that is quite complex and nobody understood it. So all they knew was that you get a scooter ambulance, it's going to cost so much, and that's what happens. When you look at the applicability of those things, it actually doesn't work. And that's the problem that we face today. So those solutions will only make sense when they're created with the customer at the heart. And this is what 4IR forces people, because through 4IR, customers are now starting to demand that their suppliers of services become proactive, that they know them, that they customize their services to their needs. So it's no more about just pushing product to people without wondering what it is that they're looking for. If you're a razor blade manufacturer, you better create razor blades that are informed by what your customers want and what they're looking for and what they're using. And that's where you find opportunities for skills, all right? And the other thing then is that these skills actually exist, okay? One of the investigations we did, for instance, we started looking, and Sadiso is right. I mean, you don't see too many Black people involved in AI as unique companies, but the skills are there. And for instance, Nelson Mandela University in the Eastern Cape has been doing very well at developing students in that area of work. So I think what we've got to start doing is to look for solutions locally and see if we can apply them locally. But remember, because of the cost of these skills, executives are going to be forced to think smart and to think local. That's the only way that they're going to be able to do this.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. I think you dropped quite a number of gems there, Thabo. And if in case you missed it, I think for the audience, and I remind you once again, please, Munya, I'm not sure, I'm not seeing anything on my chats, so I don't know if there are any questions. Oh, sorry, my chats went open. I see the questions are coming through. So I'll start addressing some of the questions, Thabo and Sandy, so I hope you can read them in the chats. We'll start engaging those. But Thabo, based on what you just said, I think some of the key headlines that I took from what you said, open-mindedness is probably the very first step, and a culture of innovation, very important in order to make it work within, for yourself as a leader, as a business leader. And then you spoke about customer intimacy, also known as customer centricity. And in the design fraternity, it's known as human-centered design, basically designing from and based on an understanding of the needs and pains of your user. And then that leads, I think, to one of the most important points you also made about framing innovation in the context of the problems of your client. You spoke about the legal, if you went to the legal fraternity and you told them that you're building this web-based application, which is going to change their lives, without framing it in the context of the billables and how it's going to get them to bill a lot more, how it's going to get them to turn around solutions for their clients a lot quicker, it would have been much more difficult to make that case. So yeah, thank you very much for that contribution. So going into the questions, so we've got Sarah, or Sarah, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but I'll pronounce it as Sarah. I hope you don't mind. The question from Sarah is, what defines a 4IR startup? And Sandy, so that's probably more for you. So I'll bring that one to you shortly. Dikele Ditladi is asking, is 4IR like a revised version of 3IR with improved functionality? Thabo, maybe you can prepare to take that one for us. And then Mthembu is asking, is 4IR not linked to a society that has thoroughly exploited the third industrial revolution? My question is in reference to the creation of mass employment. Okay, and perhaps, oh, I see Stumo, there's a contribution from Stumo Siroka who says industrial revolutions often overlap and there are instances of leapfrogging relative to societal states. I think that's a very important contribution. But Monde, having said that, I think that's a very interesting question, which we need to engage. And I think it would also be a lot more beautiful if we can allow you to speak at a later stage to articulate it yourself, and it will, I think, make our engagement a lot more robust. But before I come back to you, Monde, Sandy, so do you want to talk to Sarah's question about what defines a 4IR startup.
Okay,
yeah.
So I'll try and break it down. I think so fourth industrial revolution speaks to an era that where there's just a vast adoption of emerging technologies. So 4R is more, I want to just disclose, is more of an era than rather the actual technology. And so what I guess what's the characteristics of 4IR are the use of emerging technologies. So a startup would then build a solution that is solving a problem and be using those emerging technologies to solve that problem. So I'm not quite sure if we really have 4IR startups, but we definitely have startups that use emerging technologies that makes them, I'd say, be classified as a 4IR startup. So it's just technologies, obviously, I think you've spoken about them, biotech, IoT, AI, VR, AR, there's an array of them. I think there's like 10 or 20, but yeah, that's my response to that question.
Fantastic. I think that's a very succinct and brilliant answer. And Thabo, maybe we jump back to you with the question about whether 4IR is like a revised version of 3IR with just, so basically is 4IR 3IR Pro or 3IR Max?
Yeah, S or Max, yeah. No,
yeah.
I no, certainly not. It is not revised. It's maybe evolved. Okay, maybe evolved is the right word, because revised means that suggests that there's something that we had before and we went and got a revision 2 of it. But I think Sandiso was quite clear there that it is about emerging technologies, and they emerge over time and all the time. So there are certain technologies that we have now in this era of 4IR that we did not have at all in 3IR, but they do build on what we had before. So when I started, I spoke about it's like a relay race, right? So there's a pace and a distance that the previous stages went, and we got to this point here, and it just takes us further. So if you look at all the technologies that are there that we speak about as being technologies that drive 4IR, some of them were totally non-existent during the stage where we're in 3IR. So there are emerging new technologies. It's not a revised version. It's simply an evolution as we carry on, and we develop new capabilities, we develop new features, new understanding, and new forms and ways of interacting. So the distinct features, for instance, during 3IR was that you had, the big thing there was the exploitation of computing and digital technologies to communicate. It was people trying to use machines to communicate with something, right? So now in 4IR, one of the big features that you've got is that you've got these machines that are interconnected, that are just actually talking on their own without being able to talk on their own without necessarily direct human intervention in certain phases, and in other phases with human intervention. So it's an absolute evolution. And the capability in those machines today did not exist prior to this. But I also want to emphasize that it's also a philosophy more than about the technology itself. We can get stuck in the technology, and it forces people to think they must be technology experts to be part of the 4IR. You don't have to be a technology expert, but you have to understand technology so you can take advantage of it. So we'll talk about some of the skills that you require to go take advantage of it. I hope I've answered that question adequately.
Yes, I should think so. Thank you very much. And absolutely, I think the next phase that we go into will be about how we then interact at a human level. How do we interact with 4IR? How do we harness and take advantage of the technologies that it affords us? Monde, I'm not sure if you want, I think your question is very interesting, especially the last phrase where you start talking about the creation of mass employment. I'm not sure if you want to speak to it a bit over the microphone, or you are covered.
Thank you for the opportunity. Very briefly, I think when Sandis was answering, she actually touched on what was the genesis of my question. When was speaking of first perspective, in fact, that I heard, that it's actually an era or an era, the 4IR itself, not necessarily maybe product-based. So with everything that happens around the world, I'm always interested into how does it impact or affect Africa, especially, so that anything that we take on should also speak to our circumstances. And unemployment is one of them, very high. So I was thinking that the third industrial revolution, which saw a lot of digitization and all of that, which I feel has not yet been fully exploited in South Africa or Africa. Is there no danger when the focus goes to 4IR and then we basically lap up ideas and philosophies of other people into how these technologies are used, more than just the technology itself, but how it is used? But as you were speaking, an answer did come through from the Directors Association, which was a good one, which made an example of some countries in Africa that never had a physical bank, for example, but they straight up jumped onto mobile banking and stuff like that. So it kind of like answered me in a way, but I just wanted to express where it was coming from and that concern, so that even the patenting of things, IPs and whatever, some of them could come right from here to still impact the world the way they've been fashioned or thought of in our locality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwabe. And I think that was a powerful contribution. And Thabo, you spoke earlier about, I mean, we do have the skills base being developed. You spoke about the University of Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in Port Elizabeth, which you said is building a very robust course or department within the area of artificial intelligence. I'm also aware of the University of Pretoria, which has the very brilliant Dr. Vukosi Marivate, who's the head of data science there and is doing brilliant work across the continent in basically solving problems for Africans by using what data science avails. And that starts, I think, even with equipping people with very basic skills. Sandy, so he spoke about teaching kids coding, which is something that Japan was doing years ago. And that's something we've started to do in bits and pieces here and there. We have to start somewhere. But I want us now, as we draw to concluding, maybe a part that we should talk about is developing the skills. Firstly, how do we, on a wide scale, develop the skills that are needed to engage in this era of 4IR? And then for us as senior managers, as leaders, what are the type of skills typically that we need to get? And I mean, if I'm an HR manager today, and I don't want to lose relevance in the era of 4IR, all I studied at school was HR and how to manage people. So how do I begin to engage? So Sandy, so maybe you want to go first.
Yeah. So I think, learning has really evolved. It's so exciting now. I mean, there's formal learning, there's informal learning. There's so many opportunities to learn. One of the things we have available to us, and I think it's being amplified by the current pandemic, is this online learning thing. I've been seeing so many people post certificates of their AWS qualification or their, AI certification. So I think there's lots of material online, and a lot of it is free. If you look at like Udemy, a lot of the stuff is actually free and available online. So I think there's, in terms of if you want to learn about this 4IR and the technologies within it, I think there's enough content that's available that people can leverage on. I think also just, I see learning shifting from formal learning to be a bigger focus on informal learning. I think the scope is so big right now that it would be foolish of us to limit ourselves to just like formal learning and leave it at that. But because things are evolving so quickly, we kind of need to always be learning at this stage, just to stay abreast and be relevant always. So I think, as senior managers, I think what we should be doing is looking for learning opportunities, be it in the workplace, be it outside the workplace, and then also taking that knowledge and sharing it with other people as well. I do see a shift though in this e-learning becoming more readily available. I think there'll be lots more zero-rated learning platforms, as you've seen. I think that will increase. And I think even universities will lean more to online learning for their learners in the future. So I don't see it just being a pandemic solution, but I do see it as getting better at learning online and then that being scaled.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I like what you said about zero rating some of these technologies. And for those who aren't technologically inclined, what we basically mean by that is, as you would know, that we have accessibility of data, mobile data in South Africa is a huge challenge. We have one of the worst cases in the world of accessibility to mobile data. Even worse than some countries in the rest of Africa, whose technology, by the way, is ahead of ours. If you go to East Africa, the likes of Kenya, you'll find that they are far ahead of us in terms of the mobile technology and having been able to make it cheaper. So while we wait, we don't know when that will take place for that to be made cheaper and more accessible. But what we can do is build technologies that work around the circumstances of our people to be able to make such learning platforms zero-rated and more accessible. Thabo, maybe we want to get a view from you about skills and equipping.
Yeah, so about skills, before I say that, I just want to Mosiroka, there was a great contribution there. I think in responding to Monde, I was going to point that out, but I see Monde has actually come through to say thank you. Because technology does leapfrog, and what you're talking about in East Africa is a perfect example of, because we leapfrog, you don't go through all the iterative stages in technology when you're implementing it. And it's suddenly, it actually also suggests that with 4IR, we'll see that. So we may seem like we're behind now. If we do the right things, we'll get there. So from a skills perspective, let me come from a different angle. I think that we need to demystify it, right? So this thing becomes as if once you talk about coding and AI and stuff like that, it becomes something that people think is unattainable and is not there. We already have people that are either in the system working today. What are you going to do with that? So I've never worked as an HR person, but for HR people, I'd say you need to start looking for adjacent skills, right? So there are people who are sitting in divisions or in areas that are adjacent to where the skill is required, but who may have the basics that are required, okay? So there's some basic things that are not even difficult to do. For instance, you need to find people with cognitive flexibility, okay? Cognitive flexibility simply meaning that a person who's able to actually juggle between different types of thinking. That's what's going to be required in this world that we're getting into. That is why then, but the one thing that I see is that it's got to be started at primary school levels, okay? And I know I'm speaking to the converted here in this forum here, but the lower education, primary education minister and the senior, and also at tertiary, what they've got to do is you've got to start at grade 1. Below that, to start teaching the children, not necessarily how to code, but to teach them some mathematical critical thinking, teach them there are some basic skills that you can teach children through little games that you play, and that's what you start with, okay? Instead of us trying to start with these massive concepts that are either very expensive or daunting or scary to get to, that's what it is. So for instance, to make sure that your education program is as varied as possible, allows the child to have the ability to have this cognitive flexibility that I'm talking about. What am I talking about? Teach a child to play an instrument, teach them how to dig and plant a tree, and also teach them how to cook something, okay, when they're young. And what that allows them to do is to manage different skills. And they start to practice different problem-solving skills at that junior level. You start there, okay? But for those of us who are already probably older, you got to work on that. You work on those. It's basically your creative, your mathematical, and your critical thinking skills that we've got to look for. Okay, that's why I thought let's come from a different perspective. And then the other one is that's required. I'd say we need to find people who've got creativity. Okay, or you need to actually work on your creativity as people. That's what it is. That's what it's all about. Coding. I coded when I was at university. I worked when my first job was at IBM. I was actually a programmer. That's what I was doing. So we were called systems engineers in those days. I was able to go from that into marketing. Okay, that's the creativity and the flexible, cognitive flexibility we're talking about. It does not mean that the fact that you've got a computer science background, you cannot do that. And if you look at some of the disciplines in some of the American universities, were quite interesting. I've got a friend of mine who's a master in music and a minor in economics. Okay, when you start to build that diversity into the courses, that you allow people to actually start thinking differently. I studied accounting, but I've always been critical of accounting as a profession, saying that at some point it creates people who are actually tunnel vision. I'm sorry, I'm talking with Abasa here, but I'm not having a knock at the profession as such, but I'm saying at university school level, what we should be look at as much diversity as possible, because then it becomes easy for people to embrace new technologies as they come on. You can't chase for IR. It's going to happen to us anyway, you know? So you've got to make sure you give people the ability, shock absorbers, to take on the new things that come on as they come along. That's what it's all about. Because there might be the fifth one, there might be the sixth one, the seventh one, by the time our son is old enough. If we haven't started building those flexibilities in him today, there's a problem. So cognitive flexibility, creativity, critical thinking is another one. Critical thinking is about logic and reasoning, right? Is there logic and reasoning that's built into the courses that people do? And it's in the everyday life. It's in how you interact with people. It's in how you interact with people at home, at work, wherever they are. And this is basic, simple logic and reasoning. So we've got to make sure those things are introduced and they're there, okay? There are also complex problem solving skills that are required. Those are the things that are there. Before we start talking about what degrees they must have, and I think we've got to start at the grassroots, get the basics right, and then by the time we get to tertiary, it's an easy discussion. Otherwise, we're fooling ourselves. We're always going to be chasing this thing by the tail. And I think if you go to countries like Rwanda, they're starting to do stuff like that, and that's what's important. So there's still something very smart about little children playing with Lego, little children putting together puzzles, jigsaw puzzles. I mean, that stuff, that's where critical thinking, logic, and flexibility comes, right? And make sure that they're able to do just more than one skill. Let me just stop there, and I think there might be some other experts here who can come in on this particular. But that's what I'd like to propose. I think that's the easiest way to go.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot, Thabo. And we have, I mean, people are using gamification of late to pair that with education. So there are all sorts of solutions. I think parents, if you're able to buy a toy worth 2,000 Rand for a child to play with, which doesn't stimulate them mentally in any way, I don't know what stops you from subscribing to an application that helps your child develop in critical thinking, in creativity, cognitive flexibility, all those skills which you mentioned. And by the way, I mean, the skills you're mentioning are quite consistent with what WEF, if you go and look at when WEF publishes all the future-oriented skills, basically the skills that you should be developing if you want to be relevant over the next couple of years. WEF from time to time publishes such a list, and I mean, all those skills are there. And even for ourselves, I think as grown as we are, Ingondo, Aiboli, you know, your brain is always in a position to be stimulated. Download a Sudoku app. I learned Sudoku at age 28, about 2 years ago. I just gave away my age, but I learned how to play Sudoku and I love it now. I'm addicted to it, and it stimulates my mind because I get to play around with the numbers and where they need to be placed, and just that building that sort of culture of also steering yourself and inclining yourself in that way. We got a couple of comments here, and I'm going to read these before we draw to a close. And as we draw to a close, I guess I'll just, want to get some parting shots from both of you, Asandiso and Thabo. Basically what you'd like as your power punch to Abasa and the Directors Association communities and anyone else who may be joining. Basically a call to action. What can we do today? Where do we go from here, and how do we make things happen? Okay, so in reading questions here, we've got, okay, this is a comment from Dikeledi Kladi. I think security concerns are frequently more often an afterthought, and cybersecurity go hand in hand with rapid transformation efforts. Yes, of course. I think cybersecurity, we've seen, is a very important aspect of one of the technologies that underpin the 4IR era. And you may have seen, some of the high profile cases. I think it was last year where the city of Joburg was hacked by some hackers in some foreign country. People in a whole other country are able to penetrate your systems and demand money and so forth. And so yes, cybersecurity is definitely one of the areas that need to be invested in. Jade Green on that point, my child is in grade 1, and she has been learning coding at school now for 2 years, and they also do robotics. So Jade, fantastic. Your child is definitely off to a good start, and it would be great if all schools could implement it. I think we really want to get to a point where these sort of skills are made as accessible as possible to every kind of school. And Yolanda has a comment as well on the point of one getting left behind. There are technologies that have been built for people who might be less technical, such as power apps, where there's very less coding involved. I love that, Yolanda. I love that a lot. I think, so there's, I'm getting, is that a hand there from you, Sia?
Yes, it is.
Yes, Sia, please.
Yeah, so just a quick question, I guess to both Thabo and Sandis. How do we change the mindset of the people that are leading our organization? Who often it's the older generation who are not willing to basically change and adapt to the new way of doing things, which one of them is 4IR. And the reason why I'm asking this, I actually think a couple of years back, I think 2 years back, one of the organization I used to provide a service to, it was interesting to see that they had created a millennial board, which basically was to try and create a balance whereby you've got a normal board, which is obviously made up of like 40 years and above, and even 60, 65-year-olds. And then they're so good to know, I mean, we are servicing a younger generation who thinks differently to the way we think, and therefore let's incorporate this thing of having a millennial board to basically then try and create that balance. So in other organizations, how do we then change mindsets basically on the people that are leading the organizations?
I'll let Sandy go first. I think she's right in the heart of that sort of thing. She spoke about it earlier.
Yeah, so I think the first thing before we try and change mindsets is we need to educate our leaders. I know this just back in consulting at Accenture is that people only buy stuff that they understand, and it's our responsibility to make them understand that stuff. So how we do it is we actually make people experience technology. So they would experience virtual reality, and not experience it in a way that's going to solve their problem. So for example, to demonstrate virtual reality, would take them through a roller coaster ride, which is very immersive, and you leave feeling very, very dizzy. But it just explains how immersive you can have, create environments that are so immersive. And then you start educating them on how, we could simulate in other environments, maybe training your artisans onto doing certain things. And as opposed to artisans flying around the country to go and get certain education, then they can be immersed in that, in those respective environments. So I think we need to be educating our leaders, and then in that way, what we do, make them experience it. And then once they've bought into it, I think we need to do our homework in terms of articulating the value of the return on investment on the opportunity at hand. And I think today, like I said, in technology, I don't think we've done a good job in that. So one of the reasons why I formed KUI was because at Accenture, we used to have these amazing design thinking sessions that just never went anywhere. And it's like you just there for 2 days, you build this amazing solution, but then thereafter it's not implemented. So what we specifically are strict on, we actually enforce the marrying of the designing or coming up with the idea, but then also supporting our stakeholders in deriving a business case that can help them sell this solution to their board and stuff, which is obviously a very difficult sell. But I think it's because we just haven't done our homework in terms of, and helping them capture or understand the value that we're presenting at the table. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think from my side, I'd say that, and I agree with everything that Sandy said. I think from my side, one thing that I think quite briefly is that you need to illustrate the value of these new ideas to them before you can want them to just transition. It's not easy. I mean, some of those guys, these baby boomers have been successful at what they've done for quite a long time. So it's very difficult for them to see that anything could be better than what they have today. But it's one of those things that businesses will not survive if they don't get on the bandwagon, if they don't catch the wave. You know, they will actually simply go extinct. And the one way to do that is, I had a situation where I dealt with some very high profile individuals, and we were just digitizing their workspaces and trying to change how they worked. And it was very difficult. I mean, these were very, very high powerful people, high powered people in the country. And it was just about showing them how much is going to save them time, how much is going to be easier for them to do this, but then educating them patiently. They require patience, Sia. You could get very impatient with them, but they need patience. It takes a long time for them to go from the concept of a phone with a touchpad where you could fill the numbers to a touch screen and to believe that everything could be in there. But once they see the benefit of that, they actually transition quite easily. So I think we've got to illustrate that. We've got to approach it with a lot of patience. And the other thing as well is we've got to also realize that for us to get there, I think those of you who are younger and you're in organizations, what you could start doing to illustrate the power of these kind of things is to, if you're in a management role, open up. I mean, I find a lot of organizations still innovate, but they innovate in a very siloed manner and a siloed approach. The fourth industrial revolution is all about the fact that multiple disciplines have to be harnessed and brought together. And if you can show them the value of that collaboration, by the way, one of the skills that's required is collaboration, the ability to collaborate with other people. That's what's going to be required to be able to be part of this fourth industrial revolution. So show them the power of collaboration. When multiple ideas have come together, how does it help move the business forward? And that's what's going to happen. Unfortunately, some of those guys in those positions are owners of these businesses, and you're going to have to actually come through them. But I believe if you illustrate it that way, it makes sense and they'll accept it. I have seen that, for instance, just to give you an example, and I'll go back to an example I made earlier. If you look at, or maybe let's look at the financial services industry and what they're doing now, is you look at insurance companies, short-term insurance and life insurance. They're getting people to wear these watches that sense and watch what you do all the time. Okay, there's a lot of AI involved there. But if you think about the data that comes out of that, so see, what I should do, what I believe needs to happen is that I spoke about data. Data has to be at the center of every organization, and decisions have to be data-driven. And decisions have to be based on the ability to drive them based on the analytics that come out of that data. Okay, so at least at the very inception of you trying to introduce an idea like that, show them the power of what this data tells you. So typical illustration, a lot of them will be members of either Discovery or Momentum, or one of those big medical aid schemes, and they have subscribed to all of these features. And the whole thing about is how those companies have been able to drive savings for people by based on data, working out their buyer personas to say, we've got this age group behaves like this, and we can give them a saving, we can do this and that. That's how they've actually sold it, you know. So that's how we've got to do it. So I think it's got to be evidence-led. It shouldn't be an emotional thing, but it's got to be patient as well. And we've got to break down the silos. If the younger guys who are in management can break down the silos, if you can show that the collaboration between HR and finance and product development was able to come up with something amazing. Because if you look at the products that come out of Discovery, you can see there's been a collaboration there. It's not just the actuaries that came up with that product. It's the actuaries plus the marketing people, plus this, it's all data-driven. So I think it's got to go back to data. We've got to show them the benefit of using data and illustrate that. And you do it in small subsets. I think quite often with the younger generation, the tendency is to want to come with these massive concepts. They do scare people. I think you take bite-sized chunks and show them that that's how you're going to win them over.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Thabo, for that. I don't know if that would also, if you want to maybe give us your closing remarks and a call to action, and then I'll go to Sandy, and then we draw to a close.
Yeah, so I think mine would be just to say that you know, there's a lot of material that I could speak about, but the first thing is just to realize, just to go back to what's required. I think the concept of 4IR is not a big scary thing. I think there's some basic things that are required, and I think we've got to orientate ourselves to that. I think have an open mind. Make sure that you work on your cognitive flexibility so that you can accept and see some of these things. I think we've got to also work on the ability to it's also about emotional intelligence, right? So going back to what Sia was talking about. So the whole thing about 4R and how it can be accepted by other people is for us to have that emotional intelligence that goes with it, the ability to coordinate, and leadership skills. But one of the other things I've seen quite a lot is that we never think about is just get basic technology skills. Basic technology skills, data is there. If there's a system at work that spares all the data, just know how to get in and extract the data. You don't have to be the analyst. If you can just extract the data yourself and be able to read a report like that, that's the basic thing that we need. And just embrace change. You know, that's really what I think it's about, embrace change. But what we've got to realize is that like COVID-19 and like the lockdown, it's going to happen. It's not something that you can stay out of and think that you'll actually, you can't stay out of it. If you stay out of it, you're going to go extinct. And there's an opportunity for us to harness and to pull everybody. But I still say, I can say a lot of things, but I think we've got to start at the grassroots. I think it's at the basics. It's at the small, younger people. That's where we've got to start. And then it'll go up. And then by the time we get to when this generation is probably in their 20s, 30s, we'll have a different country. But it's the investment is to start early. It's got to start now.
Thank you very much. Fantastic, brilliant. And Sandy, so over to you to give us the parting shots.
I want to give more like soft advice, and that is don't give up. I know it's hard in corporates to change people's minds is something that's just almost impossible, but it can be done. And I guess my advice is what I learned in corporate is that people love to be affiliated with winners and successful projects. So identify a problem, solve it in a meaningful way, and then tell the whole corporation about how you solve this problem, and people will surely gravitate towards you and they'll be more willing to listen to you the next time. So yeah, just like small wins help in innovation, because it's an opportunity for you to do something bigger in the next round. So yeah, so just don't lose faith, be encouraged, and yeah, just keep educating your seniors about emerging technologies.
Lovely, lovely. I love it. Such a positive note to end on. So thank you very much for that, Sandy. Also, and a joint vote of thanks. Thank you to both of you, Thabo and Sandy. So we know you're very busy, but you have kindly availed yourself for the session and have been fully present. And I want to thank our audience and participants as well. You have also been a very disciplined audience, very engaging in the chats. So we appreciate that very much. As I had introduced myself at the beginning, my name is Sbu Msimango, and I'm signing out and handing back over to Munya on behalf of the Directors Association, who have kindly hosted us on this call today. So Munya, if you could kindly give us your vote of thanks and closing remarks, please.
Thank you so much, Sbu. I enjoyed that. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I learned so much. I thought I knew a lot. Clearly, I don't. So thank you so much to you, Thabo. That was exciting. That was informative. You too, Sandy. So we really appreciate it. And I think we need to have more engagements like these, because this is what will educate us and allow us, especially, directors, leaders, to start making decisions that are informative, that are based on knowledge, etc. I'm sure we'll have more follow-up sessions just like these, and we shall invite Thabo again, Sandy, so and get more speakers so that we can have robust discussions around these topics. So on behalf of Directors Association, I'd like to thank you, Thabo and Sandy. So I'd like to thank Abasa and all the members that logged in today's session, and all the Directors Association members that logged in tonight's session. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, and we shall engage very, very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wanya.